Bonjour. Bonjour tout le monde, merci d'être avec nous aujourd'hui.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for being with us today. So, we are going to have Nazanin Boniadi with us on stage.
Okay. Let's try it again. Hello, everyone. Welcome to our panel today at the Paris Peace Forum. It's a pleasure to be here with you today. We're going to be speaking with acclaimed actress and activist for women's rights, for Iranian rights, Nazanin Boniadi, and she will join us on stage right now. Let's give her a big round of applause. So for those of you who don't know, Nazanin Boniadi is an acclaimed actress, but she's also a dedicated human and women's rights advocate with a focus on Iran. She's partnered with Amnesty International since 2008 and was appointed as an Amnesty International UK ambassador in 2020, when she was also selected for membership in the Council of Foreign Relations, the leading think tank on U.S. foreign policy and national security. Her advocacy work has taken her to the German Bundestag, the UK, Australian, and Canadian parliaments, the US Capitol, and the United Nations Security Council. She is the recipient of the 2020 Freedom House Raising Awareness Award, the 2022 Ellis Island Medal of Honor, and in 2023, just recently, she became the Sydney Peace Prize laureate and received the Feminist Majority Foundation's Defending Democracy and Advancing Equality Award. Please give a big round of applause for Nazanin Boniadi. So today we're going to be having a wide-ranging discussion about activism, about Iran, about Nazanin's work, about women's rights. And then at the end, hopefully we'll have time to do a short Q&A session. So I'm just going to jump right in. Nazanin, do you want to say a few words to the gathered audience today?
Thank you so much for the warm welcome. It's really good to be with you. Thanks for having me.
Wonderful. So Nazanin Boniadi, you're an actress and an activist, and you once said, "My first protest was in the womb." What did your parents, who themselves participated in protest against the 1979 Iranian Revolution, instill in you about activism?
Yeah, that's very true. So my first protest was in my mother's womb in 1979. I just aged myself. She was 19 and heavily pregnant with me when she would stand among the minority of Iranians, including my father, in opposition to the newly forming Islamic Republic. She had the foresight, I think, that the majority of Iranians perhaps didn't. She could see that the rights of the Iranian people were going to be stripped away very quickly with this new regime. And they were forced to escape. My parents, their lives were in danger because they were dissidents early on. And so that was my introduction into the world. It's very much part of my DNA. When I found the freedom, I was raised in London. They found political asylum in London, in the UK. And not a day went by in my early childhood that I didn't count my blessings, that I had the freedoms that I had. And I knew early on that I wanted to use those freedoms to demand the freedoms of the Iranian people.
Absolutely. And what are some of your earliest memories of activism? And what did your parents tell you about their activism?
I mean, the stories were ones of, there's a term in Iran that references the brave Iranian women called shuzan. It essentially means lioness. And my mother was always that to me. I visited Iran, the first and only time I visited Iran was when I was 12. I turned 13 in Tehran, and we had this harrowing experience with the so-called morality police. And I was I was forced to wear a hijab, and I'd never been forced to do that. I mean, it wasn't my choice in the UK. And so I was veiled at the age of 12, walking alongside my 40-something-year-old uncle. My mother was a few steps behind us, and this harrowing, this just menacing plainclothes militia came up to us and demanded that I produce a marriage certificate. And the implication being that I was married to my uncle. And my mother stepped forward. She was so fearless. I mean, the demonstration of courage in that moment, knowing full well what could happen to a woman who spoke to the morality police and stood up to the morality police like that. And I remember him sort of basically responding in a very menacing way and saying, "Lady, your time is over. Those times have passed where you have the right to answer me in this way." And I remember feeling so scared. I wanted to say to my mother, no, don't talk to him like that because you're going to end up in jail or worse. But that's the demonstration of courage that exists for women. That kind of courage is contagious. And I think that's what you're seeing in Iran today.
Absolutely. So you have partnered with Amnesty International since 2008, and since 2020 have served as an Amnesty ambassador to Amnesty UK, with a particular focus on young women and prisoners of conscience in Iran. Can you tell me about that experience overall? What has it meant for you, and how has it changed your life as well?
I think, growing up in the UK, Amnesty was very much a part of my social consciousness, with the Secret Policeman's Ball. And artists were really a prominent part of the activism, human rights. I think as an artist, artists just rely so heavily on the freedom of expression in our work that when we see it taken away from people, it feels like a natural urge to want to defend that free expression. So that's why I think you see musicians like Bono and Sting and actors gravitate towards an organization like Amnesty International and want to lend their voices and their platforms. And that's essentially what happened with me. I knew that partnering with an organization would make my work more effective, more broadly seen and heard. And I've been partnering with them since 2008, and I've been an ambassador for Amnesty UK since 2020. And it really has. I think the partnership has helped to reach a broader audience, to have campaigns and plans in place to achieve impact and goals.
Absolutely. And can you tell me, maybe it's 2008, I don't want to age you, but that's 15 whole years. Can you tell me about some of a specific encounter you've had in doing your activism and doing outreach that has stuck with you?
Yeah, I mean, numerous.
I'm sure there are many.
Yeah. This work can be very demoralizing because the successes, what we define as successes, are few and far between. You have to hold on to the victories, because every single one of those victories make the work worth it. It's why we do this. So anytime a political prisoner is freed, every time a wrongful execution sentence is stayed, every time oppressive law is overturned, a family is reunited after a hostage is released. And so those are the moments when I saw, for example, Nazanin Ratcliffe for the first time, after being one of the many, many people who campaigned for her release. And she was reunited with her baby and her husband after 6 years of being held hostage in Iran. Every time, I met Roya Pirai, for example, whose mother was killed in Iran for protesting with almost 200 gun pellets in her body. And she went and there's a very powerful image of her shaving her head in protest, standing at her mother's grave. But that courage, when I meet people like that, that keeps me going, that energizes me, and it makes every other moment worth it.
Absolutely. So today, over a year after the killing of Mahsa Amini, which we all saw last year in September 22, that galvanized a movement in Iran, the Women Life Freedom movement that followed, what to you has changed, if anything, for women in Iran?
I mean, this has been hugely unprecedented for a number of reasons. When Mahsa Jina Amini, who was a 22-year-old Kurdish Iranian woman, was killed in police custody for quote-unquote inappropriate hijab, this isn't just a young woman. She was a member of basically religious and ethnic minority groups. I think her death galvanized a cross-section, a broad cross-section of society in Iran who understood that the rights of women and girls is inextricably bound to the inclusive democracy they seek. You can't separate it. And, gender apartheid has become a pillar. It is a pillar of the Islamic Republic regime. And women have been fighting for 44 years. What people may not understand is that this movement didn't happen overnight. We may have heard about woman, life, freedom overnight, but essentially that is a battle cry. Those are three words that serve as a declaration of opposition to a regime that is misogynistic, murderous, and repressive. And, there have been trailblazers over the past 44 years that stem back from 1979 when tens of thousands of Iranian women bravely took to the streets against the new hijab laws. And their cries were met with violence and threats. And to this day, this movement has continued, and it culminated in, after the killing of Mahsa, in this really powerful uprising. And what people may not know is that for the first time, Iranian men have stood shoulder to shoulder with Iranian women, which terrifies this regime because their whole ethos is separating, segregating, and oppressing women, separating them from men. And the vast majority of protesters actually killed in the past year have been young men, showing that is, that they've really risen up for this cause.
Absolutely. And what do you think is different this time? What was it about the killing of Mahsa that really spurred this new activism amongst Iranian people?
I think it was the powder keg moment, really, the boiling point of people realizing that this regime is irreformable. And for 44 years, I think we have made the mistake of kind of believing that they would change, or they fed us this belief that we could possibly have them change their behavior. And the Iranian people have risen up saying, very clearly, we don't want an Islamic Republic. We don't want a theocracy. We want a separation of religion and state. And we want freedom. And there is no other way of looking at this. When you look at the slogans like, you lie to us that you tell us our enemy is elsewhere. Our enemy's right here. It's not America. This is unprecedented. It's completely juxtaposed to 1979 anti-imperialist liberal Iranians. Today's liberal Iranians say, we want freedom, we want democracy, and we don't want a theocracy.
Absolutely. So that brings me to our next question. Women's ability to participate safely, freely, and equally in political life is an essential feature of democracy. Why is it so urgent to bring light to this topic and demand change on behalf of women, not only in Iran, but also worldwide?
There's a great piece in Foreign Affairs written in 2022 before the Women, Life, Freedom movement by Erica Chenoweth and Zoe Marks that talks about how women's rights and democracy is inseparable. And I think, unless women's rights exist, democracy is really elusive. We can't achieve democracy. And history has shown us time and time again, from Argentina to Chile and the Philippines and 1980s Poland, that when women assented in these protests, the chance of these movements succeeding are not only higher, but the likelihood of egalitarian outcomes become higher. So this is what makes this moment for Iranian women specifically powerful and important, is because the recognition that they are centered, they were the spark and the engine of these protests. And I think if they win in this fight against this patriarchal, misogynistic system, imagine what it does, a free secular Iran does, not only for Iran, but for the region and by default for global stability.
Absolutely. And to you, what does that win look like, tangibly?
I think rap artist Tumaj Saleh, a dissident rap artist who's been in prison for over a year, has said it best. A free, democratic Iran looks like people leaving their homes and seeing a police officer on the street and not being afraid of being abducted by them, of being taken to an undisclosed location, of being tortured into giving forced confessions that will be televised, or being wrongfully executed, being raped, blinded, gassed, tortured, forcibly disappeared. I mean, these are real concerns that Iranian dissidents have. And I think basically, as he put it, a free secular Iran is a 180 from what we're currently seeing.
Absolutely. My next question, all over the world today, peace is under threat, just as women's rights are. Do you think that more countries should invest wholly and intentionally in supporting the implementation of mechanisms to ensure that women participate fully, not just in civil society, but in their country's feminist foreign policy?
Yes, and I mean, I'm really happy to see Foreign Minister Baerbock, for example, of Germany, do that with German foreign policy and lead with the feminist foreign policy. I think investing in women, obviously, as we said before, not only leads to more egalitarian, peaceful societies, but I think it lends itself to just being a more accountable, representative government. And if that's what democracy is supposed to be, then we can't neglect half a country's population in leadership roles.
Absolutely. And do you think that the possibility of maybe a common framework for feminist foreign policy could be a solution?
Yeah, I think, I've been advocating for unity for the past year because I don't think that democracies are as united as autocracies are right now in our common objectives. And if we want democracies globally to prevail, which of course hand in glove with women's rights, then we have to be united in our policies. And I think the West can do a far better job of that than they're doing currently.
And what do you think they're missing currently?
Maybe they're not talking, because what I'm finding is, I advocate for one thing in one country, and then, another country seems completely oblivious, or they completely opposed to this policy. And unless we can all sit around a table, and for example, hostage diplomacy is a good example, right? So we haven't found a way to de-incentivize hostage diplomacy, which is exactly what the Islamic Republic does. It takes hostages to be able to achieve its political goals. And we keep giving them money in return, releasing their prisoners in return. And I say prisoners for a reason, because in Western countries, usually, for the most part, there's due process. So for the most part, there's due process. So if somebody is in jail, it's far more likely that they've actually committed a crime. Whereas in Iran, there is no due process or fair trial. So if somebody's in jail, the likelihood of them being guilty is actually quite low, because we don't know. There's no way of proving that they've actually done something wrong. So that's the difference. And if we don't all come together and have de-incentivized hostage diplomacy, then the Islamic Republic will continue taking hostages, and we won't overcome this. We won't defeat it. That's just one example, but we don't seem to be coordinated in our efforts.
Absolutely. My next question, I think, is acutely tied to that. In part of your work as an ambassador for Amnesty International, you've petitioned for artists and filmmakers who have been held hostage in a way by the Islamic regime to be released. So what do you think is the role of cinema, particularly, especially in a country like Iran, to change the conversation and to move the conversation forward?
That's a great question. I'm acutely aware that my fellow artists and activists are languishing in either jail or they've lost their careers for simply speaking out against injustice. There are several prominent actresses, Tarana Ali Dousti, Hengame Ghaziani, Katoon Riyahi, for example, who have dared to go and do interviews with foreign outlets without the compulsory hijab, or they've simply shared in solidarity with the Women Life Freedom protest a photo of them without themselves without the compulsory hijab. And they've lost their careers, or they've spent time in jail, or both. And so I'm acutely aware that I am very privileged to be able to do this work and have platforms like this to speak from without those concerns. But the role of cinema in particular is a powerful one in free and fair societies where you can express yourself freely, and in times where, women have often been sidelined from historical figures, female figures have been sidelined or forgotten. you can bring them to the screen. And Hidden Figures is a great example of that, where 3 African-American female mathematicians who worked for NASA, it brings their story to the screen, and they were leaders. And I wouldn't have known about them had I not seen that film. So cinema has I think I say as an actor, I get to portray the human condition. Hopefully as an activist, I get to change the human condition. So much of that is storytelling in both cases and empathy. And cinema has the ability to evoke empathy.
Absolutely. And I just wanted to, we talked a little bit about, our questions, but I thought this could be a good segue into the work you did in the refugee camps and being kind of behind the camera. So can you tell us about why you think it's important for you, beyond just being in front of the camera and telling those stories, to do that behind the camera and tell the stories of, Iranian refugees who are escaping the regime to come to Europe or to go to the US, and telling those stories factually and letting people see beyond just, the hot spots that they see on the news or in newspapers?
Yeah, I think it's as simple as, like, if you don't see images and if you don't hear stories about people, you tend to not care. I mean, the way to evoke empathy is to show people what's happening. And I went to Calais and Dunkirk a few years ago to create this, to make this short documentary, Stateless, because I felt compelled to meet a lot of these Iranians who were escaping Iran because of persecution and injustice. I wanted to meet them firsthand and then see them and talk to them directly, and to document their plight, mainly because I wanted to show Western leaders that these are the people who we need to be providing safe havens to. Unfortunately, the West has done a really bad job of allowing basically regime officials and their dependents to live in our societies comfortably, go to our universities and basically thrive, and then go back home. And I'll give you an example. The current communications minister of Iran, Issa Zarepur, got his PhD from the University of New South Wales in Australia. His 2 kids were born in Australia. Then he went back in 2016, became the communications minister in Iran, and last year was responsible for the internet crackdowns so that the regime could kill in the dark, essentially. These are not the people we should be supporting. We should be sanctioning them. We should not be allowing them to be in our democratic countries. What we should be doing is providing a safe haven to the dissidents and the people who are oppressed, for them to be empowered, for them to have a voice, the people who don't have a voice in Iran, who are being killed. And so that's what I wanted to show, is these are the people we should be supporting.
Absolutely. And is there kind of an overwhelming feeling or sentiment that you heard from these dissidents and from these people seeking refuge? Was there kind of a unifying message in what they were looking for in leaving?
These are people who are stuck essentially between a regime that is trying to kill them or stripping them away from their rights, and an international community who's rejecting them. It was heartbreaking for me to see how much they had to offer. There were doctors among them. There were the kids with dreams of becoming a fireman or a nurse, and to hear these kids and their stories of, I want to be able to take care of my parents one day who have sacrificed everything for me. I can relate to that as a kid who was a political refugee, and I wanted to be able to say that we can help them. I hope we can.
Absolutely. My next question, we're going to move a little bit back to women's rights. Women's political representation worldwide has doubled in the past 25 years. I think that's amazing. We should all give a round of applause. But it's not done yet, right? However, this only represents around 1 in 4 women members of parliaments today around the world. There are 9 women heads of state in the world, which only represents 6%. Do you think there would be fewer wars if there were more women in power around the world?
I mean, yes.
Yes. Do we all agree?
But I think that the root of that is because the way we as women deal with things, there's a lot of empathy involved. And I think when, I'll give you an example. There was an elderly woman amidst Women Life Freedom, these protests early on, this old Iranian woman, veiled, and her son was in the security forces, about to embark on or engage in a brutal crackdown of protesters. And this viral video of this woman going up to her son, grabbing this big burly guy by the shoulder and marching him away from these protests, essentially telling him, no, you don't do that. You don't kill these innocent people. That's the power of a woman in conflict. And I think to myself, what if that woman was a leader? Like, what if that woman was in government? What if that woman... That is essentially our power.
I agree. Will there be a moment for you? I mean, you've been doing this activism work for 15 years or even more. Will there be a moment for you when you say, okay, I can rest. We've done it. What does long-term and effective change look like to you?
Long-term and effective change is, specifically for Iran, I mean, the work continues beyond Iran, obviously, but for me, in my area of focus, as long as there's injustice, as long as there's inequality, the work continues. As long as there are opponents to what we're doing, essentially, and there are many opponents to this work. If human rights advocates didn't have opponents, we wouldn't need to be doing what we're doing. So essentially, I hope for a day I can retire from this work, because that would mean that there would be no more injustice and inequality to fight.
Absolutely. And just to bounce off of that, and since the Mahsa Amini's killing and the protests, you've taken a step back from acting to give yourself full time to activism. Tell us about that choice. Why was it important for you to kind of, I mean, you're stepping back from your livelihood, right? And why was it so important for you to make that choice and to put yourself out there, and even to at great financial cost, I imagine? What did that mean for you to do that?
I mean, look, yes, there have been personal sacrifices, but I think it pales in comparison to what the people in Iran are experiencing on a daily basis. It's the very least I feel like I can do. Obviously, it's not sustainable to not make a living, but I think when this movement happened, I thought, I've been balancing this work for 15 years of being able to have my day job and do this. This called for, all hands on deck. I didn't feel like I had a choice. It was a moment in history that I thought, if I don't commit myself to this 100%, I'll live to regret it. I want to do everything in my power to support the brave people inside Iran. Look, the work will continue in one form or another, whether I'm taking an acting job or not. But this moment really called for 100% commitment.
Absolutely. Bravo. So you met with VP of the U.S., Kamala Harris, U.S. Secretary of State Anthony Blinken in 2022, and more recently with the Australian Foreign Minister, Penny Wong. What have you advocated for in these meetings, and what have the responses been?
I love that you name so many women. That makes me very happy. The main advocacy was for them to basically understand that the women, girls, and people of Iran are rising up for fundamental political change. A lot of people have told me over the course of the 15 years of my advocacy that we shouldn't conflate human rights advocacy and essentially democracy activism. And this is why I disagree. If the pillars of a system ensure its wrongs can't be made right, then the pillars need to be replaced. And we are very scared, the West is very scared of the term regime change, because we think that that means that we have to go do it, that we have to start a war, or we have to intervene some way. I wanted to relay that that's not what I'm advocating for. The people of Iran don't need to be saved. We need to stop saving the Islamic Republic regime. We need to stop doing business with them. We need to essentially empower the people and disempower the regime. And those are the policies that we should be focused on, not sitting at a negotiating table with them. Their behavior, they've shown time and time again, will not change. And so the only way to do this is stop addressing the symptoms of the problem with Iran and start, which is essentially the nuclear issue, hostage-taking, terrorism, and start addressing the cause. The cause is the regime itself. The brave Iranian people are standing up to say, we don't want this regime. How can we empower them to self-determination?
Absolutely. And what were some of the responses that you got? How was your messaging and your advocacy received?
Overwhelmingly positive responses. I think what I'm still looking for is a a united front against the Islamic Republic, understanding full well that many of the major problems that we're seeing in the world today stem from this regime. And as long as they're in power, there will be not only freedom for the Iranian people, but there won't be any regional peace or global stability. So those are the things I'm calling for, listing the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps as a terrorist organization. The US has done that, other places haven't. But also recognizing gender apartheid under international law, defining it under international law so that we can hold the regime to account. Right now, the word apartheid only applies to race. And if we get that defined, then we can hold the regime to account. There are a number of other avenues that we're pursuing, but essentially they all need to sit around a table and agree to a way to disempower the regime.
Absolutely. So most recently, just last month or this month, you were in Australia as the recipient of the 2023 Sydney Peace Prize. And you have had great impact and reach as an activist over these 15 years. Considering the Islamic Republic regime's repression of artists and dissidents, do you ever fear for your life? And what keeps you going?
Yes, I just came from Australia like 2 days ago, which is, that's a lot of travel.
Are you awake?
I know. Look, I would be lying if I said that there's no threat to dissidents overseas. Time and time again, they've either been killed or there have been plots to take them hostage, or we've seen what happened to Salman Rushdie in New York. But all of it pales in comparison to what's happening every day to the Iranian people. When I think about the daily indignities they face, they put their lives on the line. The very least I can do in a free democratic society is to raise my voice. And of course, the regime in Iran is not happy with any of us raising our voices. But what keeps me going is Nazila Maroufian, who has escaped Iran after multiple imprisonments. Every time she was freed, she shared a picture of herself without the compulsory hijab, with a peace sign, with flowers in hand. She'd shared that photo knowing full well she'd go back to prison. And she did. Or Nobel Peace Prize, 2023 Nobel Peace Prize laureate Narges Mohammadi, who's currently on hunger strike and has continuing to defy the regime despite 30 years of being oppressed as an activist and persecuted. Mahmoud Mollairad, whose 9-year-old son, an aspiring inventor, Kian Pir Falak, was shot to death by this regime during the Women Life Freedom protests, who is demanding accountability and is under house arrest reportedly for seeking justice for her son. These are the brave people in Iran. Fully veiled Fatima Saperi, who is in prison right now and who chooses the veil but demands the right to choose for every Iranian woman. And demands a secular democracy. She's, despite being denied medical treatment and her life being at risk and being in prison, she continues every day. These are brave people who keep me going. I see their courage. I always say courage is contagious. I learn from them. I'm inspired by them. And as long as I see that, it means that I have no choice but to continue my work.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Nazanin. It was a pleasure. And now I'd like to open the floor for questions. We have about 10 minutes. So if you have a question, please raise your hand and we will get a microphone to you. Oh, we've got someone at the top left.
Hello, I'm Matthias. I'm a student at Sciences Po here in Paris. So my question was about, you talked about a united front, international united front against the Islamic Republic. So I want to ask as well, do you feel that women's rights movements and feminist movements, which do not have at the moment a connection to the Iranian cause, can help? How do you think they can help? And do you think this kind of international sorority is possible?
Thank you for the question. I do think it's possible. You're right in the fact that I think for too many years, Western feminist policies and activism hasn't really been tied to the feminist cause in a country like Iran or Afghanistan, where there's also gender apartheid. Until we see our cause and our view as one, we have no chance of succeeding. because defeating patriarchal misogyny requires every single one of us, right? I mean, it's if we only focus on, say, the Me Too movement in the West, without understanding that Iranian women are standing up at far greater cost to themselves, and uniting under a single banner. Because again, the similarity being the contagion of courage, whatever context you see one woman stepping out and speaking up, another woman following behind her. We have to understand that that's exactly what they're doing, but their lives are on the line. And if we don't unite, there just simply won't be a solution for all of us. And I think that's the reality of it.
Thank you for your question. Anyone else? Questions in the audience? Oh, we've got someone right there.
Hi, I'm Parham and I work for the German Development Ministry. I have the question is, who do you think should the target audience be for the activism? Is it Western governments? Is it people in Iran, outside Iran, the civil society actors? Who you think can make the most impact and change the way things are at the moment in Iran? Thank you.
Thank you. When I speak, I definitely don't speak to the people of Iran. They know far more than me how terrible the regime is. I think the people whose hearts I'm trying to change are Western officials and people in the West. For far too long, and this relates to the prior question, we have been told that the hijab is a cultural issue. Compulsory hijab is a cultural issue. We shouldn't interfere. And hopefully, the past year has thoroughly debunked that idea. Women of Iran, in particular, and girls of Iran, have bravely stood up against this regime precisely because the Islamic Republic's despotic culture is not theirs. And so that's what I'm trying to reach Western lawmakers and officials to hopefully change their policies towards a country or the regime that has oppressed its own people, and understand that they need to stand unequivocally with the Iranian people and not the regime.
Any other questions? Oh, we've got someone right here. Ladies, the mic is free as well. Don't be afraid to raise your hand.
Hello. My name is Ahmad Zia, and I'm glad to see such a brave woman like you. I'm personally in contact with many Iranian young men and women, and I'm coming back to the solution that you said, that the West have to sanction Iranian government. But don't you think that it will directly affect the daily life of the people, and they will suffer? The young ladies, I'm sure that they will suffer, and also of course, the families, and it will affect the whole family and how they will grow up. Thank you.
Thank you for the question. Yes, undeniably. But I follow my lead from the Iranian people. So when the people of Iran are rising up, and none of their slogans for the past year have been anti-sanctions, none of their slogans. In fact, like I said earlier, one of the main slogans has been, our enemy is right here. You lie when you say it's America. Now, America is the main cause of these sanctions. If they were opposed to sanctions, knowing full well that it is affecting their lives negatively, I promise you their slogans would have been death to Trump, death to, these things that would have indicated that they're opposed to sanctions. That's not what they've been saying. They are so at the end of their ropes that they just want this regime gone, understanding full well that that means that they will suffer as a result of these sanctions, that they want the sanctions. I mean, many of them speak to me as well, and they say, look, we don't want to suffer, but also we have to understand that this regime is corrupt and that their economic practices are corrupt. So even in the year and a half of the sanctions being lifted during the JCPOA, that didn't impact the people positively. And right now, the oil revenues in Iran are up 15 billion since the first year of implementation of the JCPOA. The people of Iran are not seeing that benefit. Hamas is, Hezbollah is. That's why one of the slogans has been, not Lebanon, not Gaza, not Lebanon, my life only for Iran. Because they're saying, stop putting that money into those terrorist groups and invest in your own people. We deserve to have better infrastructures, better lives. So, of course, it is affecting them. But that's not something that I'm hearing from the people as something to advocate against.
We have time, I think, for one or two more questions. Yes, we have a young lady. Thank you.
Thank you so much for being here. My name is Justine. I'm a student in Sciences Po as well. And my question would be on Europe's role and position towards the fight of women in Iran. And we talked a bit about the US. You talked about the debate around labeling the guardians of the revolution as terrorists. That links us to Europe. In 2023, we've seen many debates around that. The European Union has enlarged the list of high-position leaders in Iran being forbidden to enter the European country, the European space. Do you think that this is important and has a real impact on women in Iran? And do you think that they could do more? And if yes, what could they do? Thank you.
Great question. Yes, I think we could do more. The example of Issa Zarepur, the communications minister, is a great one because I think he hasn't sanctioned by Australia, even though he achieved his PhD from Australia and then went back down to crack down on protesters in Iran. But he has been sanctioned by the EU and by the US. But there are definitely people in key sort of oppressive roles in the regime that haven't been sanctioned, that need to still be sanctioned. But it's also important to enforce those sanctions and not just list names and say, look, we sanction these people. Enforcement is also important. And I think what the main objective has to be is if we say to the Islamic Republic regime that these people who are oppressing Iranian women, girls, and people in general then get free rein to come to our universities and study here and have platforms and be interviewed by our top journalists and write op-eds in our newspapers, then we are platforming and empowering these people. And it gives them free rein to continue what they're doing to the people of Iran. So yes, we need to do more. We need to deplatform these people and give a platform to the brave protesters, to the people who are dissidents who've just, I know a few who've just gotten to France, and they deserve those platforms. They deserve the opportunities in the universities. And instead, the people who have the resources from the regime are getting those opportunities, and they're being stripped away from these brave dissidents who desperately need it. So that's the very least we can do. But I would urge, as just a starting point, something we can all agree on, to define gender apartheid in international law. Everyone can go to endgenderapartheid.today to learn more on this issue. It's a very important cause, because if we can break that pillar of gender apartheid, which is one of the pillars holding up this regime, I think the likelihood of this regime collapsing is quite high.
I think that's a great point to end on. Thank you so much, Nazanin, and thank you all for being here.
Thank you so much.